waiting to enter the country, despite a judge's ruling which keeps what's known as Title 42 in place. Now, this COVID-related policy allows authorities to turn migrants away from the US, but officials say it likely won't slow down those border crossings. CNN's Matt Rivers met with some asylum seekers on the Mexican side of the border. Here's his report.
¿Estás nervioso que las autoridades en los Estados Unidos no van a permitirte a entrar al país? Are you nervous that the authorities are not going to allow you to enter the country?
Sí. Yes, very much so. More than the nerves is the uncertainty of not knowing how long we will have to be here, especially for the baby. He's only a year and a half old, so yes, it's difficult.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo. Okay, suerte. So his story there, very similar to other stories that we have heard in this shelter. The shelter is called El Buen Pastor, the Good Shepherd shelter, and it is completely full at the moment. The majority of migrants here right now are actually Haitian, but as you just heard from our interview there, he is Venezuelan, there's people from Honduras here, and this shelter, which can hold 80 people, is now completely full. And we can show you some of them. I want to enter into one of the dormitories here, and just bear with us because it is a little dark as we transition from sunlight to darkness here. There's no lights in here, but you can see just how completely full this dormitory is. It is just bunk bed next to bunk bed next to bunk bed. There are dozens of people that are living in this facility, most of whom are spread out through the facility. They've asked us to respect people's privacy here, so that's why you're seeing empty beds. But there are people who are sharing bunk beds here. Now remember, Ciudad Juarez is one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, and as a result, people that come into the shelter can't actually leave unless they have a good reason to do so. One of those legitimate reasons would have been to apply for asylum at the border. And many people were hoping here that with the expiration of Title 42, that they could have gone to the border to do that more easily. Of course, that didn't happen with the federal judge in Louisiana continuing to allow that policy to be in place. And that's been very disappointing for people here, many of whom would have gone to the border to try and apply for asylum. And we spoke to the director of this facility earlier today, who told us that things can't continue like this. He's building another facility just across the street that he says can house more than double of what he can hold right now, and yet when that is finished in 2 months' time, he says he already knows that there won't be enough people, enough room rather, to handle all of the people that he says are still going to be in this area.
That was Matt Rivers in Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. And one other note, the US Department of Justice is trying to appeal the federal judge's decision blocking the Biden administration from lifting Title 42. Well, coming up, from California to Kolkata, the world reeling from the effects of our warming planet. We're live from the CNN Weather Center. Up after this. Well, this hour, if you've been with us for the full hour, in fact, the full 2 hours, We've gone from Ukraine to Finland to Davos, looking at the many knock-on effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As Europe scrambles to find alternatives to Russian oil and gas, US climate envoy John Kerry is warning against using Ukraine as a lever to double down on fossil fuels. He urged world leaders to speed up the transition to clean energy.
I am absolutely convinced we will get to a low-carbon, no-carbon economy on this planet. I cannot tell you I'm convinced that we will get there in time.
Well, that will remain to be seen. Meanwhile, our planet is already exhibiting the effects of this crisis. CNN meteorologist Chad Myers joining us now from Atlanta. This isn't a news story, but it is a news story that we must return to again and again and again to remind ourselves, our viewers, those of us who want to inhabit this planet, that we are staring down the barrel. It is precious. What is going on?
And it's even more precious to me than others that are, that are grandparents and they only have a few more years on them. I'm a parent of a 17-year-old son that is going to have to live through this. We're just not looking 20 years down the road from when they put me away. It's going to be 17 years plus another 60 for him that he's going to have to deal with. So climate change. The reason why we're talking about it is because there have been so many events. Heat waves, dust storms, flash flooding, the flash flooding that we had in Europe over the last summer, and then obviously sea level rise with the waters warming. So let's get to it. India had the hottest March on record. Northwest and Central India had the hottest April on record. And the UK Met Office said that this should happen every 314 years, but with climate change, it will happen every 3 years now. A 100 times more likelihood that we see numbers like this, sometimes over 50 degrees C in the shade because of climate change. It's part of the warming of the atmosphere. We know there's going to be more droughts. We know that there will be more heat waves, and those are going to be coming more and more often. Something else that's going on here too, sandstorms. Now, once you get a sandstorm going, the dust and the sand just kind of lands in a different place. The next storm, the next wind event, moves it along again. So this is just one after another, kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy that just doesn't get better. It just still gets worse every time the wind blows. Something here about a 15-year drought in this region. We can show you to you in different colors. You can see the sand blowing around. Here's a yellow representation of the sand. But here's what it looked like on the ground in Baghdad. The air was filled with dust and sand. Many people had to go to the hospital. Back out here in the American Southwest, a 20-year drought has stricken the area. Many plants are completely dead out there, and hundreds of thousands to millions of hectares are going to burn this year. A lot of ground out here. It's already started. Fire season is already going. We haven't had rain, good rain, in 15 to 20 years, and we hope for more. Maybe some this summer, but you never know. Becky.
Chad, it's always a pleasure having you on, however sort of apocalyptic your vision is, but we've got to keep going on this one. We've got to remind people that there is a solution. There really is. Thank you. And to those of you who are watching in the Middle East, particularly those in the Gulf who may be about to or already experiencing dust storms, do be careful. Those sandstorms can be dangerous as well as bad for your health, of course. Well, you don't hear this too often, but an exciting day for London commuters. For tonight's parting shots, we are taking you aboard the newly opened Elizabeth line right here in London, costing a whopping $25 billion. The line stretches 100 kilometres and stops at 41 stations. In the excitement, many passengers wore masks depicting members of the royal family. Well, after Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth's surprise appearance at last week's opening ceremony of her eponymous line, it is now officially open to the public. While this is a soft opening with 12 trains running per hour, the full schedule with up to 24 trains per hour is expected to come no later than May of 2023. Thank you for joining us. That was Connect the World. CNN continues after this short break. Good night.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher in New York and this is One World. Fierce fighting is raging in eastern Ukraine with dozens of towns under attack as Russia launches an all-out assault for two key cities in the Donbass region. In this tweet, take a look here, Ukraine's foreign minister is calling the offensive the largest one on European soil since World War II and is appealing to Western allies for more heavy weaponry immediately. Kremlin forces are advancing from three directions, attempting to trap government troops and surround the last remaining pockets of resistance in Luhansk. Further south, one local official says Mariupol has turned into a continuous cemetery, with a horrifying new discovery underscoring that reality. An advisor to the mayor says that 200 bodies have been found in the rubble of a high-rise building, and in yet another sign that Moscow is tightening its grip on areas that it controls. Russian media reports pro-Kremlin officials in Kherson will request a Russian military base in the region. CNN's Suzanne Malveaux joins us live now from Lviv. So Suzanne, just walk us through this new report that workers digging through the rubble there in Mariupol actually found 200 bodies in a basement. What more can you tell us?
That's right, Zain. Ukrainian officials now look at that city as completely controlled by the Russians, and they say that more than 20,000 residents of Mariupol have died since the beginning of the war, that many of them were hastily buried in nearby courtyards. And yes, one of the advisors to the mayor there saying that they have now made this gruesome discovery, 200 bodies in the rubble of a high-rise building that is next to or near a suburban gas station. This official saying, quote here, Zain, that the bodies were found in a basement underneath the wrecked building in an advanced state of decomposition. The city has turned into a continuous cemetery. Now, that same official saying that Ukrainians having a difficult time to claim the bodies of their loved ones because of the process that the Russians are making them go through, that they not only have to go and pick up the body and bring it to a morgue, but then they have to agree to making some sort of video statement that their loved one was killed by Ukrainian forces and not the Russian forces, so clearly making it very difficult even for proper burial of these residents, Zain.
And let's talk about the Ukrainian First Lady, because she's appealing to the WHO to really focus on the sort of mental toll that this war is taking on Ukrainian citizens. Just walk us through what she's asking for.
Well, she has described, Zain, as many people as you can imagine and have seen, that this is a country in crisis in some ways, a mental health crisis, that there are families who've been torn apart, that there are parents who have lost their children, children who've become orphans, many people who are suffering from the assaults of war and rape and the uncertain, the unknown, that there are millions who have fled their homes. There's some who are trying to get back. And so this is really a very, very difficult time for many Ukrainians. Now, we are following an American group, the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. They're partnering now with Ukrainian professionals, healthcare professionals, to try to provide and train some basic tools and techniques to begin that healing process. Now, I want to warn our viewers that this video you may find disturbing.
In the cities of Bucha and Irpin, the streets are quiet. The sun shines brightly. The Russian forces that committed gruesome crimes just weeks ago are gone. As part of a therapy exercise with her family, 8-year-old Sofia Balashova is asked to draw what it was like for her during the fighting.
Tell me what the picture is of.
The Russian warrior is killing the child.
American psychiatrist Dr. Jim Gordon is in Ukraine, working with local partners to develop an urgent program to address the overwhelming trauma here.
Most important thing first is to say to people, there is a possibility of change. This isn't necessarily permanent. There is hope.
They're hitting from tanks, from bombs, everything.
For 19-year-old Angelina Kosyanova, her worst nightmare was realized. Bombarded here in Irpin after already fleeing her childhood home in the east when Russia attacked in 2014.
trauma of the war are with me for 8 years. With my family, we sleep in this room.
Angelina and her family sheltered in the basement with their neighbors for more than a week.
I was asleep here when was bombed.
Outside, dead bodies were found in the streets.
It's very hard when you understand that you maybe can lost your home again. And you're afraid that you can die.
Now Gordon teaches her techniques to help cope, using deep breathing and movement.
The shaking and dancing allows people, those trauma-frozen bodies, to melt a little bit. Just shake.
Angelina, who now counsels children who've lost their parents, will join a workshop Gordon is offering on how to fight trauma during what is expected to be a long conflict.
Really nice to see them.
The Okada family is on the move and facing multiple crises, living in a shelter with 4 children in western Ukraine's Lviv since fleeing their home in the east. A missile attack at their neighborhood train station traumatized the children.
They ran home and hid themselves under the beds.
Gordon asked them to draw, and their pictures are dark.
This is a grave.
A grave.
A grave.
For 13-year-old Nastya,
she draws herself collapsed on the ground in a state of total terror, with the railway station blowing up.
Nastya's mother reveals she cannot express her own emotions. She has to be strong for her children. Her daughter is overwhelmed with grief.
The pain fades a little, but still I want to go home.
In due time, do you think you will?
Yes.
Her family's future, she imagines, a little brighter. A first step to healing.
And Gordon will be working with Dr. Roman Ketcher. He is a renowned therapist here in Ukraine, along with the Catholic University in Ukraine, for a 2-day emergency session, online session, June 6th and 7th, to begin that training process to those who would like to participate to begin the process of healing. Zane.
Unimaginable what children and families are going through right now there in Ukraine. Suzanne Malvo, live for us. Thank you so much. In a stinging rebuke of President Putin and the war in Ukraine, a 20-year-old veteran Russian diplomat has resigned, calling Russia's invasion an aggressive war. Boris Bondarev said those who conceived of this war only want to remain in power forever, live in pompous, tasteless palaces and sail on yachts that cost as much as Russia's entire navy. Nick Robertson has more.
This is by far the harshest criticism of President Putin by any of his diplomats that we've heard since he invaded Ukraine. Boris Bondarev says that this is an aggressive war, not just against Ukraine, but against the world, that it is against the people of Ukraine, but also it is against the people of Russia. And he says that because what Putin is doing, he says, is denying Russians a free and prosperous future. And he has very heavy criticism for his boss, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who he says came in with high expectations into the job. But in recent years, he's seen him now as deviating from his core task of diplomacy and is now involved in warmongering and hatred. And that is clearly an effort there by Bondarev to signal to other Russian diplomats who will have seen Lavrov in the same light and in the same terms, will be a signal to them that perhaps they should add their voices to his criticism as well. But where he perhaps lands the most damning criticism of President Putin is where he strikes a note saying that Putin is only in this for the power. The leaders who led us into this war, he said, are only in this for power. They live in pompous palaces. And that really strikes a tone that was set a couple of years ago by the leading opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, around the time that he was jailed, because he exposed what he said was one of President Putin's lavish villas. Putin, of course, denied it. But this is sort of striking at the heart of what many indeed patriotic Russians may already sort of understand about President Putin. Bondarev also says that Putin doesn't care how many Russians are killed as long as that keeps him in power. Again, this will strike a tone with many Russians. Harsh criticism and difficult for President Putin to deflect, and certainly the strongest from a Russian diplomat so far. Nick Robertson, CNN, London.
Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov had this to say today in response to Bondarev's resignation. He told reporters Mr. Bondarev is no longer with us. Rather, he is against us. He condemns the actions of Russian leadership, and the actions of the Russian leadership are supported by almost the entire population of our country. This means that this gentleman spoke out against the general consolidated opinion of our country. Meantime, sanctions against Russia are draining Putin's war machine. That's a direct quote today from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who addressed delegates at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. But she also warned that Russia is jeopardizing world order. One example of that is how this war is driving up the price of grain and fertilizer, helping trigger a global food crisis.
In Russian-occupied Ukraine, the Kremlin's army is confiscating grain stocks and machinery. For some, this brought back memories from a dark past, the times of the Soviets, crop seizures, and the devastating famine of the 1930s. Today, Russia's artillery is bombarding grain warehouses in Ukraine, deliberately. And Russian warships in the Black Sea are blockading Ukrainian ships full of wheat and sunflower seeds.
Satellite images are helping to back up those claims and provide evidence of Russian theft of Ukrainian grain. Alex Marquardt shows us how they're playing a vital role in this war.
These new satellite images show what appear to be the ramping up of theft by Russia of Ukrainian grain being poured into the open hold of a Russian ship. This was in the Crimean port of Sevastopol on May 19th. Then, 2 days later, a second ship docks, and it too is filled. Now, both Russian ships are sailing away.
Українці.
This weekend, President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of fueling a food crisis and of gradually stealing Ukraine's food supplies and trying to sell them. An earlier image from Maxar Technologies shows one of those same Russian ships in a port of their close ally, Syria, the Ukrainian grain waiting to be unloaded onto trucks. These extraordinary, revealing images are so close and so clear that they look like they could be taken by drone or helicopter.
You can actually see the grain pouring into the open hold of the ship.
Stephen Wood and his team at Maxar spotted the ships in this much wider image of Crimea.
This is 400 miles up in space. To be able to see that kind of level of detail, the ships, the cab of the truck, pretty phenomenal stuff.
Maxar and other commercial satellite companies have played a critical role in what we know about Russia's war in Ukraine, with satellite imagery that is unprecedented, both in quality and how it's being used.
Before, this was only available in the halls of CIA or the U.S. government or friendly foreign governments, to now we're showing it on CNN.
We're keeping a very close eye on that column of Russian vehicles, that convoy we've been talking about for several days. They alerted the world to the famous 40-mile-long Russian convoy outside Kyiv, the rows of hundreds of mass graves near Mariupol, potential war crimes in Bucha, and the aftermath of the Russian bombing of the Mariupol theater.
The satellite is in the final stages of getting ready to be shipped very soon.
We were given a rare tour of Maxar's satellite factory in Palo Alto, California by CEO Dan Jablonski. Joint projects with NASA and others. Construction underway on 6 new Maxar satellites, which will allow them to scan a single spot on Earth 15 times a day. For decades, Maxar has provided all kinds of images to both private clients and to the U.S. government, their biggest customer. How much does the U.S. government tell you where to look?
They tell us where to point the satellites and take the imagery, and then that's what we feed into them as a service, the same way we would do for Google Maps, for example.
Will the intelligence community, for example, say, we know that there is a war crime that has been committed, there are all these mass graves, for example, train your satellites there, and then push out those images to the press?
They might ask us to make those collections, but they do not influence or ask us to necessarily put out what we're putting out to the public.
Maxar is now giving imagery to the Ukrainian government, part of the U.S. aid for Ukraine, in a fight, the U.S. and others now say, that has resulted in Russian war crimes. To what extent are your images going to be critical in these war crimes investigations?
For example, the bodies that were found on the street in Bucha. We had imagery correlating at the exact same time where these bodies were, down to the place, the time, and the moment. It's having that kind of fidelity of data that we now have that makes that possible. And I ultimately think it will play an important part.
Each one of those cargo ships that we showed you in those new satellite images can carry 30,000 tons of grain. Russia, of course, denies that they're stealing it, but what they aren't taking, they are targeting or blocking from getting out of Ukraine. Devastating for Ukraine and the world, which gets so much of its food from Ukraine. At least now, thanks to these satellite companies like Maxar, we can see it all happening. Alex Marquardt, CNN, Washington.
China and Russia are sending US President Joe Biden and his allies a less than subtle reminder of their power. They carried out joint drills as Mr. Biden met with leaders of Japan, India and Australia in Tokyo for the so-called Quad Summit. Japan's defense minister said that Russian and Chinese bombers flew around Japan in military exercises that were more provocative than usual. That exercise comes just one day after Mr. Biden angered Beijing by saying the US would intervene if China invaded Taiwan. Today, President Biden says that does not change the US policy of so-called strategic ambiguity.
Mr. President, is the policy of strategic ambiguity towards Taiwan dead?
No.
Could you explain?
No.
Mr. President, would you send troops to Taiwan if China invaded?
Our policy has not changed at all. I stated that when I made my statement yesterday.
Will Ripley is in Tokyo with detail. So, Will, how have members of the Quad Alliance responded and reacted to Joe Biden's slip of the tongue, if you will?
Well, I think that everybody kind of stands there and shrugs their shoulders because they might be just as confused as the rest of us are, whether this is some sort of a deliberate strategy where the U.S. president says at least 3 times, including at a CNN town hall back in October, that the U.S. would come to Taiwan's defense militarily if China were to attack the self-governing island. And then that's walked back by his staff. But now with President Biden walking back the remarks himself, it just adds to this state of confusion over what actually is going on here. Is the United States answering the call of, for example, the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, who says it's time for strategic ambiguity to end. It's time for countries that want to stand with the democratic system in Taiwan that is not recognized by mainland China, which has claimed that island as its territory for more than 70 years since the end of China's civil war, even though the communist rulers in Beijing have never actually controlled it. The former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is saying it's time for the United States to signal that it would come to Taiwan's defense. Japan has recently been signaling publicly that it would likely come to Taiwan's defense. Given that Taiwan's outlying islands are so close to Japan, they consider it a national security issue. And the United States would consider it a national security issue, given Taiwan's location right in the middle of the first island chain. Strategically important, not to mention Taiwan's crucial role in the global supply of semiconductors, the chips that power our smartphones and our cars and our cameras, and would cause essentially a global disaster for the tech industry. People waiting more than a year for cell phones, even longer for laptops if there were any sort of disruption. All of those things make Taiwan extraordinarily valuable to Japan, the United States, U.S. allies, and enough justification, some in this region say, for the United States to say more clearly what it would do if Beijing were to use its massive military to try to retake this island. And, Zane, U.S. intelligence has indicated that Beijing's goal is to grow its military to such an extent that they could take Taiwan with or without U.S. intervention. And, of course, even though in Taiwan, as they up their defense budget every year and they add, additional training for their reserve soldiers and look at new types of asymmetric warfare, much like what we've seen in Ukraine, they are well aware that without the backing of other democracies in the region, they wouldn't stand much of a chance militarily if Beijing were to try to make a move.
All right, Will Ripley, live for us there. Thank you so much. Right, still to come here on One World, a new look and a new set of challenges. Our Richard Quest shows us why this year's World Economic Forum will be unlike any other Davos event we've seen before. World Economic Forum in Davos is looking a lot different than previous years. Not only is it being held in the springtime, but leaders there are also trying to address new challenges troubling the world. CNN's Richard Quest explains.
The Davos we have known for decades. Battling up the mountain in snow to improve the state of the world.
It's not rocket science to tell what's different at Davos this year.
So where's the snow? This is WEF and Davos. There should be snow.
This year's WEF is less Ice Station Zebra and more Sound of Music. Everything from the place to the geopolitics is different, often in dramatic ways.
This is Cafe Schneider normally. It's an excellent cake shop here in Davos. In recent years, it's been taken over by India, which is still here now, and also Russia. This was the Russia House. Well, look closely. It's sort of the same but different. Now it's the Russia War Crimes House.
Ukraine has its own place of honor on the prestigious promenade.
I guess this is one thing that will never change in Davos. How many limos does it take to improve the state of the world?
Besides the war, there's a raft of economic issues on the agenda. High inflation, higher interest rates, lockdowns in China, the possibilities of recession.
Over the years in winter, I've used just about every analogy and metaphor you can think of for skiing and the global economy. The mountain is in a dreadful condition, and arguably the global economy is exactly the same. Like the global economic system, this snow is not fit for the purpose of building a snowman. There's always the risk in the global economy that something goes wrong. Now with Davos in the spring, I've got a whole new vehicle to play with. So, my mountain bike is the global economy. It's got all the mod cons you can think of. Power to drive it forward when needed. Interest rates of brakes to slow things down when it's too hot. The latest technology, it's all here. We think we know what we're doing. And then you look at what's ahead. That hard slog to get it right. This is why the next few years are really going to be so difficult, because no matter what policy actions taken, there are going to be huge challenges, ramifications, difficulties. But eventually we should be in a good position to carry on the hard work. In the end, it doesn't matter whether it's snow or spring. The challenges are ahead and we've just got to stay the course. If we do that, there'll be smooth ground ahead. Richard Quest, CNN, Davos.
And Richard Quest anchors Quest Means Business live from Davos in about 2.5 hours or so from now. Today he interviews European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the Polish Prime Minister as well. That's 8 p.m. if you're watching from Lagos, 10 o'clock at night if you're watching from Nairobi. All right, coming up, a seismic shift is set to take place in America with the Supreme Court poised to strike down a 50-year-old abortion rights ruling. I'll speak to actress and activist Dakota Johnson about what comes next. Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines. At least 10 people have been killed in a building collapse in southwestern Iran, and some 50 people may still be trapped under the rubble. The 10-story building gave way on Monday in the city of Abadan. Authorities are investigating the cause of the collapse. A local mayor and other people related to the building's construction have been arrested, according to local media. New images have been published of the British Prime Minister apparently attending a party during a COVID-19 lockdown. The photos obtained by ITV News are said to show Boris Johnson raising a glass and giving a speech at the Downing Street event in November of 2020. They've reignited calls for the Prime Minister to resign and also raised questions about whether or not he lied to Parliament about the party. The World Health Organization reports that more than 200 confirmed or suspected cases of monkeypox are across 16 countries right now. Researchers are investigating the cause of the outbreak, especially in countries that don't normally see cases of the rare disease. I want to bring in CNN health reporter Jacqueline Howard. The US is in the process of actually releasing monkeypox vaccine from national stockpile for high-risk people. Jacqueline, what's the latest? What more can you tell us about that?
That's right, Zane. The latest, CDC officials are in discussions about offering vaccinations for people who they consider to be at high risk. So that could include healthcare workers, for instance. And what we know about the vaccine that's been licensed for monkeypox here in the United States is that it is administered as 2 doses, 4 weeks apart. There are 1,000 doses, more than 1,000, I should say, available. And CDC estimates that it is 85% effective against monkeypox. And just last night, Dr. Raj Punjabi here in the U.S., he coordinates the White House's monkeypox response. He said that some vaccinations have already been offered to healthcare workers. Have a listen.
Even with the first case in Boston at Massachusetts General Hospital, our colleagues across the government have been able to get vaccines to that hospital. And just yesterday, they've already started offering the vaccines to healthcare workers who've been exposed.
So that is the latest here in the United States. But on the topic of vaccinations, Zane, globally, World Health Organization officials have said that they will release guidance or recommendations on who should be prioritized for monkeypox vaccination, who would be included in that high-risk group. And as I mentioned, I'm sure healthcare workers might be included as well, but we'll have to wait to see what the WHO's recommendations are in the coming days.
Yeah, and just in terms of the number of cases, we're hearing that there are more than 250 cases around the world. Still a small number, obviously, but how can we all remain cautious, Jacqueline?
Yes, it is still a small number, and the best thing right now is for us to just be aware of these unusual cases because they are unusual for a few reasons. One, as you see on the map here, these cases are emerging in nations where the monkeypox virus is not endemic. So to see cases at this level in these various countries across the globe is unusual. And then number two, health officials have said that they are investigating the virus possibly spreading through sexual activity. So that's another part of the investigation as well. Zane?
All right, Jacqueline, thank you so much. Appreciate it. In the United States, nearly 50 years of abortion rights for tens of millions of women are now hanging in the balance. But we may soon learn whether or not the Supreme Court will actually be overturning Roe v. Wade before it goes on recess in about a month. The leak of a draft decision by the High Court indicates it's poised to strike down the 1973 landmark ruling constitutionally guaranteeing a woman's right to an abortion. And that right isn't just being threatened. At the federal level, Republican-led states across the country are drafting bills to ban or even criminalize abortion as well. The strictest one could go into effect immediately in Oklahoma, where the governor is expected to sign a measure banning abortion at fertilization. It's modeled on a law that took effect in Texas in September. Time now for The Exchange, where we look at the outcry over the Supreme Court's potential plans. Ever since its draft opinion was actually leaked, high-profile celebrities such as Amy Schumer, Mark Ruffalo have spoken out in support of abortion rights. And among them, Dakota Johnson, star of the 50 Shades of Grey film series. She has been working with the president of the Center for Reproductive Rights, Nancy Northrop, to educate more people about this issue. Earlier, I spoke with both of them and asked them about the possibility that the Supreme Court could overturn Roe versus Wade. Take a listen.
Well, the leaked draft opinion showed just how high the stakes are for the Supreme Court's decision coming up in this case, because the leaked draft opinion was a full-throated overturning of Roe versus Wade. Now, of course, we don't know what the final opinion will be, but if the court in any way upheld Mississippi's ban, it will, in fact, have overturned Roe versus Wade. And the consequences are going to be swift and devastating. Probably almost half the states in the United States will ban abortion, and people will have to travel, if they have the means, to other states to get access to care. It's going to be chaos and a massive setback for the rights of women in the United States.
No one should be forced to have a child, regardless of their circumstances, and no one should be forced to resort to unsafe methods of having an abortion. I really believe that I believe in reproductive freedom.
Just in terms of the reaction to this, I mean, obviously people have been outraged, people have been angered, deeply, deeply upset by this. We're hearing that protesters are heading to outside the homes of conservative Supreme Court justices. But what is the right way for people to channel their anger and to challenge this in the most constructive way? Dakota, your thoughts?
I think it's a lot about shifting the narrative. I think it's about normalizing the conversation around abortion. And I think it's about people getting out and voting in state to state in all levels of elections for candidates who are pro-choice.
And Nancy?
Yeah, the vast majority of people in the United States support the right to abortion, and it's important that people make their support visible, and we've seen that since the leaked draft opinion came out. It's important for people to share why this is important for them. What we know is that 1 in 4 women in the United States does make the decision to have an abortion, and that is a decision that is individual for each person. And people want to make these decisions for themselves, not have the government intrude on it. And that's what the constitutional protection has been about, that it is for the realm of personal liberty for each person to make the important decisions about who we marry, how we raise our kids, and our access to contraception and reproductive health care.
And Dakota, Roe versus Wade is just one pillar of the conversation surrounding women's rights. What do you think that Hollywood can do to really try to champion gender diversity and really what women have to offer our society?
I think Hollywood can tell more true stories, more accurate stories about women, about being a woman in society, about being a mother in society, and the trials and tribulations, the real truth of it, the fear, the complexities. It's I think we've seen so many idolized women on screen, and I would love to start seeing more of reality, women that I can really connect to and relate to.
Nancy, when you think about the lengths that some women had to go to in this country to get an abortion prior to 1973, let's talk about the late 60s. We're talking about, backroom abortions and, in some cases, self-induced abortions. What is your greatest fear right now?
Well, my greatest fear is that the Supreme Court does issue an opinion, like the leaked draft opinion, that would fully overturn Roe, send it back to the states, that so many states would be seeking to block access to abortion care. And that means that, people who are struggling to pay the bills, people who live in rural communities, communities of color, young people, are going to have the hardest ability to get access to care, because people are going to have to cross multiple state lines, take time off from work. And that is just a loss of an ability, if they can do it, to be able to make this important decision about their life and their health and their future. So I think we're going to see a different situation than pre-Roe, because I think people are going to be accessing medication abortion, which is safe and effective to be used at home and to be used by telemedicine, and that's really important. So that's a difference since pre-Roe. But it is still going to be a circumstance where people are struggling to get the health care that they have a right to, and that they should be able to get in their home community.
Dakota, you were just talking there about the importance of Hollywood sort of championing the stories of real women. You know, a lot of people are out there protesting. A lot of people are having conversations about this. You talked about the importance of voting and getting your voice heard in that way. But as a leading woman in Hollywood, how are you using your platform to really champion stories about those real women that you talk about?
I think that's just it, you know, being here today and working with Nancy and trying to get this message heard by more and more people. I have a voice that's louder than, say, someone who is struggling to make ends meet and can't afford to have a child. And, you know, in states like Mississippi, I'm here because I have a louder voice, and it's so important for other people in my position to get loud and to have this conversation and really, you know, as Nancy said, the majority of people in America agree with this. And the minority is what is quite loud, using very vulgar language that gets a lot of attention. So if we can get loud and get the facts out and get real education out, I think that hopefully it will make a difference.
It's so critical what Dakota is doing and what every single person in the United States who cares about access to safe abortion, access to reproductive health care, access to our personal liberties needs to do as well. Because even if you don't have Dakota's platform, everybody has a sphere of influence, and it's important that no matter what that sphere of influence is, people are letting their community know that they care about the ability for each person to make this important decision about their life.
All right, Dakota and Nancy, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Dakota Johnson has also been taking part in Global Citizen Now, a summit to end extreme poverty. And you can also see her in her starring in her upcoming film, Cha-Cha Real Smooth, on Apple TV. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Zain Asher. African Voices is up next. You're watching CNN.
Welcome to African Voices. I'm Mari Tokbo. This week, I'll introduce you to a Cameroonian canoer who's found himself not only in a race against other teams, but in a race to clean up the river he rows on.
It is about having a conscience. That is, to know that as inhabitants of a community, we have the responsibility of taking care of our city.
I teach students to protect the environment. My name is Leah Jikume. I'm the change maker.
It's a quiet day along the Wuri River in Cameroon. One of Leah Dikume's favorite places to row.
The
river, Wuri, I can say it is sacred to us. I grew up in a society where we had parents who told us the beauty of our culture. And it is through these daily exchanges that I learned to be in love with nature, and mainly with our river, the Wuri, which is a space carrying history for our country, Cameroon.
The canoer says his passion for rowing stems from his connection to his heritage.
The practice of the canoe in our country is something very specific. Why? Because it defines us and reminds us of our identity as sons of the water. Because all Sawa are children of the water. And you know that life itself comes from water.
Today, he and his brothers are practicing for the annual canoe race at the Ngondo Festival, a traditional water celebration in Douala every December.
The Ngondo is a tradition to the Sawa people, as you may know. The Ngondo reminds each and every one of us of our origin. It is through the Ngondo festival that we remember our culture and celebrate the divinity of our rivers. The canoe race has a major stake in the Ngondo, because it is the canoe race that connects us to the waters.
Leah knows what it takes to win the race. His team placed first in 2021.
Last year, I had the chance to compete for the Jabale village, and we emerged champions of the canoe race. It was really hard win, because the training was very tedious.
He says there's no time to waste ahead of the next competition.
In order to keep fit, we gather here once a week to exercise our bodies.
After spending so much time on the water, Leah says he began noticing a serious problem surfacing.
One day, when I was walking with friends, I was shocked to see the amount of plastic waste washed up in the river and inside the mangroves. The Minister of Environment recently said that 600,000 tons of plastic waste are released into nature each year. If we don't stop throwing plastics into the river, then we will not only experience the loss of mangroves, but also aquatic life in its entirety. When we went to rivers where fishermen practiced fishing, they told us they are unable to move further into the river due to the piled plastics. I was shocked because when we were growing up, the river was a thing of joy. You couldn't be 30 years old without knowing how to swim. But today, it is shocking to know that there are people who go 30, 40, 50, 60 years old without ever stepping foot in the water.
Leah took matters into his own hands and began collecting piles of plastic stuck in the mangroves.
Every time people saw me collecting plastics from the river, they asked, "Is he mad?" But with time, they understood that I was doing the right thing because they saw with me that the rivers are dying. And why is that so? Because humans, who are the main perpetrators of this destruction, have turned our backs from that responsibility.
With help from his family and friends, he launched the Makoma Matanda Association, which translates to Friends of the Mangrove.
I was with my older brother. I was also with my friend. We sat down together to discuss how to save our river. We all made very good propositions, and we began calling on volunteers, and Gradually, we began receiving the volunteers. It wasn't easy. Our association is called Makoma Matanda. Many people know us as Matanda Ecotour.
The group recycles plastic waste it collects from the river. In 2020, it removed 1.5 tons of plastic from the mangroves.
Matanda Ecotour, since 2019, has always been keen on the protection of the river ecosystem, and our positive actions are beginning to resonate, because last year, we saw that foreigners came to see what we do. For us, it was such a joy to see that our work is not only resonating nationally, but also internationally.
But Leah says there's still more to be done.
We want to say that the organization has grown, although it is still lacking the means needed to achieve our set vision. We lack the materials and logistics needed, such as trash bags, nets, gloves, etc., to do the job efficiently and effectively. Because what we do here in 1 hour, we can do in 10 minutes if we have these materials. That is why we are urgently seeking help from the population, from international organizations, and from humanity at large, because today, due to globalization, we have become a global village. Let us be united and make our planet a wonderful place to live in.
Leah is looking to the younger generation for help.
It is in the line of our duty to take care of our rivers. I urgently call on my young brothers and compatriots from north to south, from east to west, to understand that the Ruri River is for the entire Cameroon. It is the main source of livelihood for our country. We therefore need to stand together to fight against plastic pollution.
Next, see how Leah is helping the youth connect with the environment. Leah Dukume is a rowing enthusiast on a mission to teach the next generation of Cameroonians how to canoe. He says he feels a sense of responsibility to pass on his culture's traditions and help the youth build a connection to the Wuri River.
It is important for me to give this knowledge to the younger generation so they will know the uses of the paddle in the Sawa environment. It is a traditional instrument because our ancestors used it to move from one place to the other. The paddle is therefore a symbol of travel, mobility. It connects us to our origin that wherever we see a paddle, we remember the river.
He hopes one day his students will follow in his footsteps and race in the annual Ngondo festival. But learning how to row takes practice, patience, and rhythm.
Preparing the children for the race is not easy. They need to first learn to be disciplined and also to learn the songs in order to understand the pace of the racing. It is a way of letting oxygen into the body, which helps to tone the muscles. It is also in this breathing that we find the pace that will allow us to go further.
Once their strokes are in sync, it's time to suit up and hit the water.
It is important that after having studied these theories, we implement it through the race practice that we are having here today.
As the students hit their stride, Leah says he couldn't be prouder.
I was very surprised when I began teaching the younger generation. I thought they were interested in PlayStation. But my surprise increased when I noticed that they were rather delighted to learn our traditions and cultures. They are always present and very willing to learn.
Leah is confident with every stroke their connection to the river will grow, and it will inspire them to find a way to protect the environment.
We who are regularly in the water see these effects of climate change. It is important that we think of sustainable development in our conscience as well as its resilience in all of these parameters. If nothing is really done, the river will die. It is up to us to fight it with our energies and our efforts.
Today, the students got to see how Leah cleans up the river with his organization, Matanda Ecotour. The group first and foremost removes plastic pollution from the river. They're also building a network of mangrove ambassadors.
It is important for us to create this awareness to people of the entire world that, for instance, once you buy a bottle from the shop, that empty bottle can end up in the rivers. We are happy to deliver this message to everyone so that they understand there is a close relation between the land and the river through the negative daily actions we carry out within our society. We want people to understand that the environment is firstly our own selves, because man is in contact with the environment. So in order to be happy and healthy, we must take good care of our environment.
After a successful haul, he hopes this group of rowers will join him on his mission to keep the water clean for generations to come.
I think we are making them ambassadors to save our community, because tomorrow we will have people who will continue these actions. We will not lose hope for one day on something that we have begun. Even if we do not get to where we ought to be, the children we teach, the children who we pass on this knowledge to, will do better things than what we did.